On Chinese social media, a lot of people are spreading this claim like crazy. The US military couldn't rescue their pilots, so they sent them straight to heaven. They've even turned Saving Private Ryan into a meme, basically rebranding it as Killing Private Ryan. At the same time, these same people are completely hooked on American movies, watching stories about the US government betraying its own people with great enthusiasm. And here's the most bizarre part. They actually use American movies, made by Americans themselves, as proof that the US government is dark and evil. Meanwhile, when it comes to real things happening around them, like veterans protesting for their rights, or overseas Chinese workers being exploited, they choose to look the other way. So what exactly is going on here? Today, I want to talk about something deeper, how people can end up living in a reality that's almost the opposite of reality, when information is filtered. Let's start with a comparison. A recent US military rescue operation sparked huge controversy. To save 2 pilots, the military deployed over 100 aircraft. And in the end, to prevent sensitive technology from falling into enemy hands, they even destroyed their own special operations transport planes and helicopters. Now, what was the first reaction from many Chinese media outlets? Not, were the pilots saved? But instead, how much did this operation cost? For $100 million. And suddenly, the narrative exploded everywhere. Was it really worth it for just 2 people? This is the wastefulness of capitalism. Some even said, if you can't save them, just give up. That's the rational choice. But here's the real question. If you were that pilot, how would you want your country to calculate that cost? Would you want it based on a cost-benefit analysis, or based on a promise? We will come for you, no matter what, because this isn't really about money. It's about something deeper, trust. Whether a soldier is willing to carry out a mission often comes down to one simple belief. If something happens to me, will someone come and get me? That's why the US military emphasizes a core idea. We don't leave people behind. The power of that statement isn't that it's fulfilled 100% of the time. It's that it's treated as a promise that must be honored as much as humanly possible. Because once that trust exists, it strengthens the entire military. Soldiers aren't machines. They're risking their lives. And the belief that someone will come for me is what gives them the courage to do that. Now let's look at the other side. In 2018, there was a large-scale protest by Chinese veterans in Zhejiang. Who were these people? They were former soldiers, people who had once worn the uniform and served the country. Their demands were actually very basic. Job placement, benefits, and basic security. And what happened? There was no dialogue, no meaningful resolution. Instead, they were dispersed. A large number of police were deployed. Communications were cut off. The area was brought under control. Some participants were later sentenced to prison for disrupting public order. And in that moment, their identity changed from heroes to targets of stability control. There's a stark contrast here. When the country needs you, talks about honor, sacrifice, and duty. But when you need the country, it starts talking about stability, order, and cost. This is what I would call a one-way commitment. The state can ask you to sacrifice, but it doesn't necessarily take responsibility for what happens afterward. You can see the same logic in another group, overseas workers. Under the Belt and Road Initiative, large numbers of Chinese workers have been sent to Africa and Southeast Asia. On the surface, this is part of a grand national strategy. But in some real cases, these workers face extremely harsh conditions. Passports confiscated, wages withheld, freedom of movement restricted, and even cases of physical abuse or denial of medical care. So when something goes wrong overseas, who is there to protect them? Often no one. They are neither heroes nor protected individuals. They are treated more like replaceable labor. To put it bluntly, tools. Now let's put these 3 things together. The US military going to extreme lengths to save people, veterans being suppressed when they protest, overseas workers being ignored or even abused. You start to see a pattern. These are not isolated incidents. They reflect 2 very different systems of logic. One says, people are a cost but also a core asset. The other says, people are resources but first and foremost they are to be managed. But what's even more interesting is how information itself gets distorted. On Chinese social media, you'll often hear claims like, the US military doesn't really rescue people. Movies are all fake. The American government is cold and ruthless. But where does the evidence for this come from? American movies. And that's where it becomes almost absurd. Yes, American films often portray the government in a negative light. But that actually proves something else. They're allowed to make those films. These works are, at their core, forms of criticism, reflection, even satire. But once they are taken out of context, edited and reframed, they become, see? Even they admit their system is dark. And that's how something strange happens. Critical content gets turned into proof. At the same time, another type of information is tightly controlled. For example, questioning official casualty numbers in a conflict can be labeled as insulting martyrs. Discussing certain historical details can lead to content being deleted, accounts banned, or even legal consequences. So over time, the information people are exposed to becomes highly filtered. What you see is a curated version of correct memory. What you don't see are the fragments of reality that don't fit the narrative. And what happens then? People develop a very stable worldview. The outside world is chaotic, hypocritical, and cruel. The inside world, while imperfect, is generally good. Even when contradictions appear, the brain filters them out, rationalizes them, or simply ignores them. And that brings us back to the beginning. Why would people believe that the US military sends its own pilots to die? Because that narrative fits perfectly with what they've already been conditioned to believe. Meanwhile, real information, like costly rescue missions and long-standing commitments, feels almost implausible. When someone lives long enough in an environment of filtered information, their standard for truth is no longer the facts themselves. Instead, it becomes, does this fit the worldview I've been given? But the deeper issue is this. This kind of thinking doesn't just distort how people see the outside world. It changes how they see themselves. If you grow used to believing that the state can abandon individuals at any time, personal fate can be sacrificed, then your expectations will gradually shrink. You stop demanding fairness. You stop expecting protection from institutions. You even start justifying the system. That's just how reality works. Stability matters most. Just endure it, it'll pass. And over time, you develop a skill, self-persuasion. So let's go back to the core question. Why is trust so important? Because every system, whether it's a military, a company, or a country, ultimately runs on something invisible: trust. If a soldier doesn't believe he'll be rescued, he may hesitate in a critical moment. If an employee doesn't believe they'll be protected, they won't fully commit. If a citizen doesn't believe the system will support them, they'll start looking for alternatives. And those alternatives are often where real instability begins. So the real question was never, is $400 million worth it? The real question is, how much is a country willing to pay for the life of an individual? And even more importantly, does its past behavior make people believe it will do so again? So the next time you see someone say, they wouldn't even try to save their own people, ask yourself one thing: is that based on facts? Or is it based on a conclusion that was already decided in advance? Because if a society can't even have an honest conversation about who will come to save you, then its real problem runs far deeper than any single rescue mission.